idea of like the house, it actually does have a lot of tropes, like what they talked about in Gorgias. Like, if you have these houses, they just keep getting bigger and bigger, and these houses, like, no matter how big your mansion is, you just won't be able to fill it, and you'll constantly want to fill it more. And then versus like me, like I'm like almost living in my dream house right now. It's just like a tiny, shitty little like city apartment. But like I'm happy with my little shitty apartment and like the weird little things that I have in there. And I think it's more important, like it's exactly like what they said, it's like if you're happy with what you have, rather than like that mansion will never be full, and you can fill it for 30 years, and you can't put enough like Black and Decker appliances in it.
Well, the Socratic point, and Lauren, I see your hand up, so I'll call you next. But the Socratic point is that, you know, the American dream, this lifestyle of constantly doubting and desiring, this is not actually a contented lifestyle. I get maybe because of the doubt. You know, you never have enough. You can never be satisfied. Someone in the chat pointed out this idea of keeping up with the Joneses, which is also an American trope. You have to have what the neighbors have, right? They have a pool, you got a pool. They have a boat, you got a boat. They have a lawnmower, you get a lawnmower, right? That kind of stuff. The implicit pressure of living in this materialistic society in suburbia. And that's not contented lifestyle according to him. Interesting point Kevin makes me think of is this thing called the tiny home movement. Have you guys heard of the tiny home movement? I just love reading about these tiny homes. They're like 8 feet by 10 feet. You know, people give away everything. They live in a tiny little trailer. They can be quite nicely appointed. You have a ladder to get up to your bed on top of the kitchen stove. They're really compact. Some of them are quite beautiful. There was a gorgeous book on them in the Michael Library if we ever get back there again. All right, Lauren, you're up.
I think it's also interesting to see how like the sort of idea of what the American dream really was or is kind of shifted with historical events, because like it started out as like a place where like your title or whatever it is, it's not relevant. Like it's just, oh, you've got to work as hard as you can, and then eventually you can achieve whatever you want to. You can get rich, you can go off and live with your land, and be content.
Ooh.
Because it's dependent on how hard you work, it means that there is a lot of competition involved in that. So it just has to keep on expanding.
Excellent.
That becomes a bit of an issue.
I love it. Were you finished, Lauren? Did you have anything else you wanted to say about that? No? Robert? Yo, Robert.
Well, I think Cameron raised a really interesting point, Lauren. But I think when I was reading it, the whole book, I found it really interesting how they were only talking in absolutes.
Mm-hmm, yeah, I saw your point there. Yeah. Well, what is the myth?
I think the good life is
Sorry, Robert.
I think the good life is about having the things you want, but also being content and not desiring more and more and more.
Kind of.
And I think you need to find that.
Okay. Your connection's not super, Robert, so maybe you could fix your connection. Also, feel free to type it in the comments. How about a life of moderation, right? That kind of a thing. And I guess the salient question I would ask at this point is that does the American dream lend itself to moderation? And I would say no, because this whole economy, this whole lifestyle is predicated on consumption, by the way, right? That's the name of the game in this economy. And that's a shame. I agree with you, Robert. A happy medium would be nice, you know. By the way, Plato is not averse to pleasure, okay? He's not. He's often depicted that way. He is famously more prudish than Aristotle. Aristotle is the philosopher who talks about the mean. And by the mean, I mean like really like hitting life of moderation of, some pleasure, some sacrifice, but not extremes. Plato, especially in early Christianity, comes to be known as the evangelist of like puritanical prudishness. And that's not entirely fair. He wasn't really like that. But you can see already with some of the language why he would be interpreted that way. I get that. Cameron, you had your hand up. Do you want to say something else?
Oh, it's like the point's kind of passed. I was just gonna say, like, back to Lauren's point, that like that idea of being able to work for a little bit, work and then go off and buy a piece of land and then start a family, like that's completely gone. You can't even do that. Like the way the economy is set up now, it's circular where the money you make now is already spent through debts and you're like in that cycle and you can never just like keep your money, like through loans and debts, the money you earn is like it's already spent. So you can't take the money you've earned and like just settle down. Like that's completely gone now.
Story of my life. Robert. Yo, Robert, you got your hand up.
Oh, I forgot to put it down.
No worries. I will tack on to something that one of you said earlier. I think Cameron, you're getting this point. Like the idea of the American dream is a very it's a very enduring dream, and it interjects into our into pop culture all the time. It's hardly dead. Vivian's right. It is changing, for sure, I guess. But I would submit there's still some essential elements to it. But what's interesting is that the general idea of it is there. It may look different, but it's still there. And by the way, one important element of the American dream that few people, that I don't think anybody pointed out, I can't tell, but it is related, Americans, look at this as a country. Americans tend to see this as a country of immigrants. Of course, that's not entirely fair because the Native Americans were here already, and African Americans were, involuntarily brought over here. But Americans generally see, this as a nation of immigrants. And one thing, the way the American dream fits with the idea of immigrants is that you do better than your parents. Mobility, social mobility is a huge thing. That's why the picket fence is important. You got to show the previous generation you did better than them. And of course, now, this all makes me think of MAGA, Make America Great Again. To Cameron's point, MAGA is nostalgia for the 1950s when those white people perceived that it was all great and dandy, right? There's an idea of moral wholesomeness as well, right? But
I don't think all the supporters are that advanced in perceiving the past of America.
Well, they are clinging to a vision of past America, which they will endorse and they will articulate it, but they're wrong. It's a false and limited history. The America of the 1950s might have been great for some white people, but for a lot of other people, it was not great. But the other point I wanted to make out is that what is probably genuinely frustrating, which the MAGA movement has indicated, and kind of what Cameron was even getting at too, is it's so hard. Social mobility is gone in this country in many ways. It's so hard to get ahead. But social mobility is a weird idea, right? How do you sustain? It's not sustainable, right? You can't do better than your parents every generation, right? There has to be some come down to earth moment. And how do you ensure that people accept this and they don't get depressed? You guys are good population to talk about this with, because you guys are happy in your little apartments. Sunny is thrilled in her laundry room, right? You guys are happy with little, I've noticed. And Lauren points out, yes, independence, individualism, privacy, huge ideas when it comes to the American dream. Huh. Good. Anybody else? Any other comments? Any questions about any of this
Yeah,
stuff.
I think also this just popped into my head. I was thinking there's something else I needed to say. The idea of like social movement being dead, right? I think it's dead because the American dream is now more of like a bait, like a hook, like a carrot on a stick to the working class. The idea that they can get out of, that loop and that cycle of being stuck in the working class. They kind of hold the American dream hostage to like these people, and like it keeps them working. It gives them hope, so they are complacent with where they are.
Mm. Like the carrot on the stick, right? Yeah. Something to work for. Good. Good. I didn't expect to talk about the American dream today. I like it. I mean, it is very important to talk about materialism and pleasure when it comes to Socrates, because this is a very common way that people understand happiness. Americans just are especially guilty of doing this, right? They understand happiness in terms of stuff. And the Greek claim is that, or what the Greek philosophers pointed out, which as did the Buddha and Confucius and many philosophers during this time period around the world, they were working on similar arguments, saying that materialism is illusory, and what's unfortunate about it, right? And materialism and pleasure are linked. And what's unfortunate is that pleasure is like, our instinct for pleasure, that is our basic impulse. That's like our natural impulse. But the point that the philosophers all point out, not only Socrates, but also the Buddha, is that humans, we are wired wrong. There's something wrong with our wiring. We come into the world, as Freud is going to say later, thinking that sex is the highest pleasure, of course, and the goal. And we think that food and drink and these material pleasures, these are the key. And yet they lead us down a path, Socrates says, which is lined with desire. That makes us profoundly unhappy. And we have to be broken out of that illusion. Lydia is with the facts. Let's see. Yeah. Yeah. Old people. God damn it. Well, listen. You better watch those two old people tonight, right? We have our first debate. What are they going to do with this country? I don't know. I have mixed feelings. I told my wife already. I don't know if I can watch that debate. Anybody else? Any other questions, comments? All good? Good. Let's get into this here now. So Callicles and Socrates have this profound disagreement about, they have this profound disagreement about the nature of the good and happiness and what that is. And Socrates essentially says to Callicles, listen, pleasure is not equivalent to the good, right? Nor is pain equivalent to the bad. The good and the bad, they transcend that, right? And he proceeds to argue at this point that, look, Callicles, you're talking about pleasure, oratory, rhetoric, this is just about pleasure. It's about flattery. You are trying to make people feel good, okay? And this leads him back to his point that this is a knack. I'm typing it in the chat so you hear me right, or a routine, and not an art or a science. And of course, that makes him furious, that is Callicles. But Socrates says, some orators, they can be good, and they can do good, and they do good when they give order and discipline to the soul, okay? And a soul that exhibits discipline and order is a soul that knows moderation. So moderation is an important virtue for Socrates. By the way, sometimes, and you're going to see this in the Republic, sometimes it's also, the translators use the word temperance, which in America has interesting history related to alcohol. The general thesis for Socrates is that desire must be tamed. Desire has got to be tamed. The kind of virtues that Callicles is celebrating, that's the life where desire dominates you and rules you, and desire is tyrannical, according to Socrates. It's not pleasant. So a good soul is one that is ordered and disciplined and moderate. And good speakers, good orators, they kind of transmit that to the soul. They inspire that in the soul of people. And they urge souls to resist desire. This is on line 505C. Good orators, they urge souls to resist desire. And again, this is flipping on its head the way the sophists and like Callicles view rhetoric, right? They describe it as making people feel good about themselves, And Socrates says, actually, it's about urging people to resist desires. Just a word, we're going to get into this more deeply when we get into the Republic, but the soul. And the Greek word is psyche, where we get the word psyche from. And by soul, the Greeks don't necessarily mean what in our culture we probably have inherited from the Judeo-Christian tradition. Is it eternal? Okay, maybe, sure, but that's not the main point. For the ancient Greeks, the soul is simply the principle of motion. Or to put it better, an ensouled being is a being that moves itself. So I am an ensouled being because I move myself. See, I'm moving my hand. But guess what? I'm looking at a tree outside my window. It has a soul also because it is moving. Trees move very slowly. They move of their own. I don't mean they move by the wind. I mean they have a principle of motion in them. What is that principle of motion? Right now, their leaves are falling. In the spring, they will bud and they will return again. So, in other words, according to the Greeks, all living beings have souls. And the soul, when it comes to human beings, is not equivalent to the mind, but it encompasses the mind. As he's going to tell us in the Republic, the human soul is, unlike an animal soul, is multifaceted. It has an animalistic part and it has a uniquely human part. And the uniquely human part, he will call the rational part of the soul. Okay? So a good and psychological, or if you will, moral problems, according to Plato, come between conflict when there's conflict between the different parts of the soul. Namely, your animalistic part, which is desirous, and the intellectual part, which is rational. And the good orator, the good speaker, is someone who introduces order and discipline to that relationship so that the desirous part does not rule the rational part. Okay? So he has to empower the rational part. That's what a good speaker does. He makes his point on 505D and 506D. And there he says, moderation and justice, these are the kind of virtues that make the soul good. The good man does well, and he who does well must be happy and blessed. At this point, we have the full Socratic thesis. The Socratic thesis. Happiness, equals, let me try it again. Oh yeah, happiness equals virtue. And I guess I need to explain what virtue is too for the Greeks. Equals the good. excuse me. So Socrates will talk in these terms. The good life for humans is the happy life, and which is not the life dominated by physical pleasures. Okay. And the happy life is the life of virtue. And by virtue, the Greeks mean arete, which means excellence. The reason I'm distinguishing that is the Judeo-Christian notion of virtue is often is burdened by notions of sacrifice, altruism. That's not exclusive to Socrates' idea, but it doesn't exhaust it. It's not equivalent. For the ancient Greeks, to be virtuous means to be an excellent human being. It means to be flourishing, to have all the parts of your soul, especially your rational part, flourishing. And when you are flourishing morally and rationally and not burdened by physical pleasures and desires, then you are happy. And what I want to impress upon you here is the idea that according to Socrates and the ancient Greeks, they were interested in a this worldly happiness, this worldly, meaning it will happen here. You can achieve ultimate satisfaction here. It will not be easy, but you can achieve it here. Lydia, were you raising your hand? No? Anybody have any questions? I'm talking in a lot of, I'm invoking plenty of the Judeo-Christian tradition today because, this being an intellectual history class, one of the things I want you to understand is I want you to understand the role Plato played in, transforming and imparting that, well, his footprint on Christianity in particular is very impressive, not least because of how this dialogue here today ends, the way the Gorgias ends, the myth that with which it ends. And that's just one of the things I'm trying to explain to you. There are differences. There are things that are unique about the Greek worldview. And there's also an important inheritance. But I'll do that as we move along here. Sunny, did I miss something? You were doing something on your forehead here. Is that okay?
Oh no, that was just because of the wrinkles on my forehead. But I did have a question. What would you say is Socrates' definition of happiness? Is it a feeling or is it a condition?
Excellent question. I wouldn't say it's a feeling, not exclusively or principally. It's a life. It's a life. It's a life devoted to rational consideration and reflection, what we've been seeing. It is a life that is not burdened by keeping up with the Joneses and material desires. One of the enduring debates that comes out of Socrates, you have two schools of philosophy that come out of him and end up being, they're at each other's, intellectual groups. They were debating for centuries. On the one hand, you have this group called the Stoics. If anybody's ever heard of Cicero and Seneca, I like these guys very much. And they carried forth the tradition of Plato and Socrates saying, well, if you want to live the happy life, you have to reject everything. And that's the life of the apology. Look what happens if you reject everything. And there is a very strong strain of that in early Christianity, especially the monastic tradition. Again, why I'm talking about Christianity is that what you have to understand is this. St. Paul, when he first starts bringing Christianity to the Roman Empire, where does he go first? He goes to Greece. And and so almost immediately you have this marriage. You know, Christianity is the marriage of Judaism and Greek philosophy. That's the point. And what you see in early Christianity, you do see strains of rejection of material goods. St. Anthony going off into the desert, rejecting everything, right? The monks in Cappadocia in Turkey, living in those like clay hills. It was pretty radical. You know? And then Aristotle is the other tradition. Aristotle argues that you cannot be happy without a modicum of health and wealth. You need a little bit of both. It's a debate that has been echoed by philosophers and philosophical traditions throughout the world. Early in his own life, the Buddha went out to the woods and he thought that he had to reject everything, and he nearly starved himself to death. The myth is that he ate 1 grain of rice a day, right? And through that horrific self-sacrifice, he has an epiphany, and he realizes that that's not productive either. And he returns to civilization and starting his own monastic tradition around the idea of some degree of moderation. But if anybody's familiar with Buddhist monks, it's really not much, just a very little bit, right? But again, this is the recurring debate. How much moderation can you tolerate? You know, why there's a recurring aversion to desires, giving into them, right? Even a little bit. Sorry. So Sunny, you were asking, you know, it's a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle. Living much like Socrates did. And I imagine many of you are not going to think that's too cool. But does it have to get you killed? I don't know. See, that's your question. Those of you have to write the essay and the Apology and Credo. Does that have to get you killed? I don't know. One last allusion to Christianity, and then I'll get back to this. But again, I can't help but be reminded of one of the parables where, I don't know, Jesus is walking with apostles somewhere, and a young rich man comes up to him and says, "Jesus, what should I do to follow you?" And Jesus says, "You must give everything away." And the young man starts crying and runs away. So there are varying interpretations about how radical the self-sacrifice must be. There must be a strong degree of sacrifice, but how radical? You know, we see in some of the dialogue, Socrates, he can drink plenty. We see that he is no stranger to sexual desire. He didn't support his family, you know, but any case. Anybody else? Any other questions or issues? Now, Socrates has just told us that, you know, the good orator is someone who has this kind of regulating effect on the souls of his listeners. He's someone who imparts wisdom. He doesn't inflame. Think about what persuaders do. Think about what President Trump does. They inflame, but the good orator, Socrates says, does not. Well, what kind of orator is that? What kind of, you know, does that person even persuade? What is that, right? And it leads him to this, oh, where did my text go? He leads, oh, sorry, guys. Can't find my text, typical. Okay, never mind. Anyway, it leads him to say at one point in the Gorgias here, oh, here it is. This is line 521D if you have your text handy. He says, you know, he's trying to depict to Callicles what the good speaker is like, the good orator. He says, In that case, I really am a fool, Callicles, if I don't suppose that anything might happen to anybody in this city, but I know this well, that if I do come into court involved in one of those perils which you mentioned, the man who brings me in will be a wicked man. For no good man would bring in a man who is not a wrongdoer. And it wouldn't be at all strange if I were to be put to death. Would you like me to tell you my reasons for expecting this? Again, this is written after the apology, but right, we know he did die, right? You did this, Socrates. You did exactly what you're talking about. Would you like me to tell you my reason for expecting this? Callicles says, yes, I would. I believe that I'm one of few Athenians, so as not to say I'm the only one, but the only one among our contemporaries to take up the true political craft and practice the true politics. This is because the speeches I make on each occasion do not aim at gratification, but at what's best. They don't aim at what's most pleasant. And because I'm not willing to do those clever things you recommend, I won't know what to say in court. And the same account I applied to Polus comes back to me, for I'll be judged the way a doctor will be judged by a jury of children if a pastry chef were to bring accusations against him. What do you think of that? Does this sound accurate? How does this compare with the apology, which some of you are writing about? What he just said here, how does that compare to the apology?
I mean, he's basically like belittling his audience or who's going to be like his jurors in the future, which isn't good PR, I would say.
Yeah. Well, Plato's writing this after he did die. That's how he died. Good. No, it's pretty disdainful. That's true. It's good. Anybody else? He says there at 521a, he says, and because I'm not willing to do those clever things you recommend, I won't know what to say in court. Does that sound accurate? Did he know what to say in court?
He knew what to say to make them hate him.
Yeah. It's funny, when I think of the apology, that's not how I would describe him. I mean, he wouldn't shut up. Lauren?
It seems like, because in the apology, he kind of repeatedly said, almost gives the impression he knows what he should say, but that he's not going to. Like, he knows what it would take to plead his case and to somehow get people on his side emotionally, but he's very adamant that he's not going to do that. So he just kind of speaks as normal, and that's what gets him killed.
Good. Yeah. He doesn't seem to have any trouble finding words, ever, for that matter. But in the apology, he didn't seem like he's bumbling, And he did an excellent job securing for himself the conviction that he gets, right? If he wanted them to condemn him, he said all the right things, right? And if he wanted them to put him to death, he said all the right things. So, his suicide mission succeeded. Again, why am I raising this for you? Because there is a degree of irony from Socrates, right? This is an ironic statement, right? I won't know what to say. Oh, give me a fucking break. You always know what to say. You just won't say the things that people want to hear, okay? I get you. Sonny says it's like he knew what he should say in court, so he decided to say what he shouldn't say in court. Yeah. And that's, Lauren was making that point too, right? Which is an interesting idea because it kind of parallels what he was saying earlier with Gorgias. Gorgias, in the very beginning of the dialogue, says, I know about justice, and Socrates makes the point, well, are you able to get someone off if they committed a crime? He said, yes, I can do that too. And he gets Gorgias to admit that if you know the person who is going to defend an unjust person must know justice as well. You have to know both. So Socrates knows both. He knows both. He knows how to get himself convicted. He knows how to get himself liberated. Okay. Any questions or comments at this point? All right, let's move into this last bit of the Gorgias, which is this myth. He's proven that doing evil is bad for the soul, and he's going to top it off, and that doing good is good for the soul. He will, well, oh, I don't know if I hit on this quote here, but, oh, did I? Yeah. He says on line 521a, I like this. He says, he will be no flatterer, but he will do battle with the Athenians like a doctor to make them good. He will do battle with the Athenians. So he's going to be a perverse rhetorician. You know, and again, it raises the question, what kind of rhetorician is that? Is he talking about persuading without persuading? We didn't really get in this on the first day, although I wanted to. You know, early on, Gorgias was saying that he's an expert. And Socrates says, what kind of expert are you? He says, I'm an expert in persuading people to listen to experts. Crazy idea, right? The doctor is an expert, but I'm an expert in persuading you to listen to the doctor. The architects are experts, but I'm expert in persuading the governors of the city to build the walls that the architects come up with, right? That suggests that expertise is not inherently persuasive. There's something wrong with expertise. And, you know, that makes me think of the two major crises we have in this country right now with regard to expertise, and that would be COVID and climate change, right? Among the democracies of the world, the United States is unique in its high levels of denial of both. And what is wrong with the experts? That they are not inherently persuasive, right? That, I feel like that is the question that Socrates is putting to us here. Can you have expertise without persuasion? But let me move into this ending myth here, because we do have to discuss this. He says he's proven that doing evil is bad for the soul, and he's going to top this off with a myth. And this myth is very, I don't know, it's kind of peculiar. I mean, I guess part of it sounds, maybe it should sound very familiar to Westerners. And there's some funny part about it. This starts on 523a. By the way, I should note that now Socrates, there is no more interjection. He has the last 4 pages all to himself, just like an orator. So it ends with a speech. He's going to give us a little taste of his medicine. And I also kind of skipped over the point. Callicles gives up. He's given up. At a certain point, he just says, you know what, Socrates, fuck it. Yes, yes, no, no, yes, yes, no. He doesn't fight anymore. And he doesn't really give any indication why he's given up. We can make some, we can surmise why, but let's talk about this myth towards the end here on 523a and on. Take a look at that again and tell us what is that? How does this myth go? What stands out to you about this myth, or somebody wants to start us off and tell us about it? What is the myth here towards the end? What's it about? Lauren?
It's about like sort of the progression from how do we judge people within this mythos after death, and eventually like what the life that Callicles has sort of been championing this whole time, what it leads to eventually. So you have at first like Zeus kind of trying to figure out how are we actually going to have a fair trial of all these different souls, and it eventually progresses to, well, we can't have any trace of what they looked like, any of their sort of more embellishing elements, because they can't be judged fairly otherwise. And then it sort of turns into a more moralizing thing of like all the tyrants are strung up and used as examples and are tortured for eternity, while everybody else isn't, if they've lived how Socrates thinks is the best way to live.
Good. Yeah, let's get to some more details about the beginning of the myth here. Zeus decides there's a problem with the way people are introduced to the afterlife, and he wants to change that. What's the problem that he wants to fix? Can someone be very specific?
If I remember correctly, originally it was the people of the living were judging where like the dead were going, if I was correct. And then people all got mixed up.
Close. When was the judgment made?
While they were living?
While they were living. Exactly. Now, another allusion to Christianity, we have this myth that St. Peter is at the pearly gates. If you ever read the New Yorker and look at all their cartoons, they always have one about St. Peter at the pearly gates, and you're trying to make your case to get in, or if you're on the registry or not. Let me make this point and get this out of the way. Scholars do not exactly know where Christianity gets the idea of heaven. They do not believe they got it from Judaism, because the Jews were divided about whether it exists. There were some sects that believed in it, others did not. Scholars largely believe that the Christian idea of heaven comes from Plato. And it comes from this myth at the end of the Gorgias, and it comes from the myth you're going to see at the end of the Republic. These are two very famous and important and influential myths about the afterlife. They are written by Plato himself. They evoke Greek myths, but they are not exactly rooted in the Greek myths. I'm not an expert in the Greek underworld, but there are major differences. And you already have here in the Gorgias a kind of proto-Christian idea that there will be a judgment day. Lauren says it's pretty Roman. Okay, that's cool. How so?
It was something like, I think Dante's Inferno in particular just kind of walks through a lot of like generally Greek, but like tending towards like more Roman later conceptions of hell. And he kind of like walks through that with a Christian lens. But yeah.
Okay. Well, he writes in the 1200s, so that would have been a good deal after. What I do know is that the Romans got a lot of their mythical stories from the Greeks themselves. But the Romans were equal opportunity lovers. They would take the myths and the gods of the Egyptians and all the people they conquered and shove them all in their pantheon. So they were kind of funny that way. But, okay, so you have this proto-Christian idea in the Gorgias that there will be a judgment day. And on this judgment day, you will come, well, there's a little bit of a spin here because we're talking about orators. You will have to give your case. You'll have to make your case. And Zeus doesn't like the way it was originally run because he says, this is around 523C, he says, in Cronus's time, by the way, anybody know who Cronus is? You're gonna have to know this, at least some of the stuff.
King of like Titans, who Zeus overthrew.
Yeah, Cronus was the father of Zeus. And Zeus will overthrow him. That is true. In Cronus' time, and even more recently during Zeus's tenure of sovereignty, Zeus, king of the gods, men faced living judges while they were still alive, who judged them on the day they were going to die. Right? So you're alive, you're going to die, you get to plead your case. They come to your bedside. Okay, dude, you're about to live an eternity in heaven or hell. What do you plead? Right? That's a lot of pressure, don't you think, for the day you die? I would
It's
hire
a little stressful.
It's pretty stressful. I think I'd hire a lawyer, the best lawyer ever. These men face living judges while they're still alive, who judge them the day they die. We're going to die. Now, the cases were badly decided. So Pluto and the keepers of the Isles of the Blessed came to Zeus and said people were undeservingly making their way in both directions. They're getting into heaven and they shouldn't. And why is this? Zeus says, all right, I'll put a stop to that. The cases were being badly decided this time because those being judged are judged fully dressed. Isn't that weird? They're being judged while they're still alive. Many whose souls are wicked are dressed in handsome bodies, good stock and wealth. And when the judgment takes place, they have many witnesses appear to testify that they have lived good lives. Now the judges are awestruck by what they see. He goes down a few lines. What are the reforms? What are the reforms? So originally, people were alerted the day they're dying, oh, your eternal judgment's on its way. Get a lawyer and put on a suit. Or, I don't know, dress up however you can. And Zeus says, I don't like this arrangement. I'm changing it. People are getting in who don't deserve. Donald Trump is getting into heaven. He doesn't deserve this. We need to change this shit. How does he change it? What does he do to Judgment Day?
You get judged after you die.
There you go. You'll be judged after you die. Anything else? You can't know your death ahead of time, right? This is going to be a shock. And you'll be stripped naked for these judges. Why?
Because then there's going to be no difference in like a good man and a wicked man. And aren't the judges naked too?
They are naked and dead. That's the next line, is that the judges naked and dead. That's right, Cameron. This is hard rock. You're naked, you're dead. They're naked, they're dead. You had no idea. Like you were just doing something, you know, you were biking along, and then poof, you're naked and dead in front of a panel of judges, naked and dead. You're like, oh, fuck. I can't even like put on a scarf to plead my case. I'm in deep doo-doo. Sid, I should say, sorry.
Either is fine. I was just gonna say it's kind of ironic that they're saying like we have to stop people from knowing their death ahead of time, because it feels like Socrates is like in this exact situation. So like I'm wondering the intentions of that.
Well, I don't know. Anybody want to comment on that?
Didn't Plato kind of make up this story that Socrates is telling?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, he did. So
He kind of makes up these stories just for like, in his story, he'll be like, Socrates made up this story that I made up and I made Socrates say. And it's kind of funny how often in this reading in particular, Plato's like having Socrates predict his own death and the circumstances of it. So I don't know.
well, I think what I would say, Lydia, and I was thinking about saying this to Sid as well, is Socrates is really, I don't think what Socrates is talking about here necessarily is supposed to pertain to him. I think he's really talking about, it's like an outlandish fantasy, this story, that, in the old days, people knew they were going to die and they got their lawyer with them and dressed up. And, you could put one, and Sonny puts in the notes, like, isn't it kind of weird these judges couldn't see through these shitheads? Yeah, I kind of like, my greatest hope in life, I hope I can share this with you all. Please keep this a secret. I hope Donald Trump burns in hell for eternity. And that's he's an unbelievable sinner. And I'm Christian. I believe he's a horrible sinner. I don't know. I'm getting into theological issues that are a little bit too profound. Probably shouldn't be incriminating. But I would sincerely hope with Sonny that when Donald Trump makes his entrance wherever, some people are going to see through his act. Right? Like, right? Like St. Peter won't be duped by this guy, right? So it is this myth is kind of fucking hilarious, like, well, people were clothed making their case and then, putting on a good show. And then Zeus says, oh, scrap this, right? Nope, you're going to be naked and dead in front of a naked and dead jury. And the translation butchers it. Oh, Vivian, rock on your roommate there. So anyway, but the point is, the main part of the myth comes on the next page where he says, and this is actually quite eloquent, I think, line 554D, he says, in a word, however a man treated his body while he was alive, all the marks of the treatment, and most of them are evident for some time after he is dead. And I think that the same thing therefore holds true also for the soul. All that's in the soul is evident after it's been stripped naked of the body, both things that are natural to it and things that have happened to it, things that the person came to have in his soul as a result of his pursuit of each objective. The point being, why are you naked? This is a metaphorical nakedness, right? Your soul will be laid bare. All of the sins and crimes that you have committed, they will be reflected in the character of your soul. I'll share two ideas with you that come to mind. In the Dhammapada, which is, it's one of the early collections of the teachings of the Buddha, and supposedly credited to him, the Buddha says that, hatred is like blowing sand into the wind. It blows right back in your face. And the point is that when you commit a sin, you don't exclusively or even principally commit it against another person, you commit it against yourself. And I hear a similar point here with Plato. Your soul will bear the scars of what you've done. And I wonder, does anybody ever read The Picture of Dorian Gray anymore by Oscar Wilde? We don't read well, Oscar Wilde, his great novel was The Picture of Dorian Gray, where anybody know the story of this? Oh God, it's a good one. Dorian Gray.
I did a illustration on it when in high school.
Do you remember the story of it, Otto?
Yeah, yes.
Just tell everybody like in 2 sentences.
Well, there's a pretty looking guy, and that's the main character, and he's like obsessed with his own beauty and something, but like he has an ugly soul.
Okay. Vivian, you popped in. Do you want to finish?
He ends up resenting the painting he makes because it reminds him of, I don't know, I think the relationship he has with the man is...
Well, hang on. You and Otto kind of skipped over a key point.
Oh.
There is Dorian Gray, who is the young man who looks like he has youth, but all his aging goes where? To the painting, right? He has this painting of himself in the attic, and all his aging goes there. So while he looks eternally young, on occasion he goes up to visit that painting in the attic and he says, "Oh shit, I'm getting old. Oh shit, I'm getting ugly and worn with sin." Isn't that right, Vivian?
Yeah, I think from what I remember, he ends up having like a mental breakdown over it and like destroys it or something.
Yes. It's been like 30 years since I read it, but I would recommend you read it if you ever get a free moment. Oscar Wilde's a gorgeous writer. But it's an amazing myth. It's similar to Plato's point. Like, you know, that's what your soul looks like. The soul of someone who, you know, if you are burdened with sins and crimes or vices, you can cover that up physically, and you can cover that up with fine suits and orange hair, but you know, your soul inside is decrepit and, Socrates points out, miserable. So the unfortunate thing is we should feel sorry for Mr. Trump, which I have a hard time doing, but more on that later. Your soul bears. And so the point is, the orators, oh, someone's speaking up? The orators like Gorgias and Callicles and these guys, you know, they can do a good job helping you seem a certain way, right? But this is but a temporary cover for something more essential. And that's what, you know, yeah, I mean, according to this myth, that's what your eternal fate rests on. Anybody else? I'm calling your attention to the very end here about what this myth means for Callicles. He says at the bottom, this is line 526D. He says, "For my part, Callicles, I'm convinced by these accounts," that is this myth, "and I think about how I'll reveal to the judge a soul that's as healthy as can be. So I disregard the things held in honor by the majority of people, and by practicing truth, I really try to the best of my ability to be and to live as a very good man. And when I die, to die like that. And I call on all other people as well, as far as I can, and you especially I call on in response to your call, to this way of life, this contest that I hold to be worth all the other contests in this life. And I take you to task because you won't be able to come to protect yourself when you appear at the trial and judgment I was talking about just now. Right? You, the greatest orator, you will not be able to persuade that last judge. When you come before that judge, the son of Aegina, and he takes hold of you and brings you to trial, your mouth will hang open and you'll get dizzy there just as much as I will here. And maybe somebody will give you a demeaning knock on the jaw and throw all sorts of dirt at you. All right. So he's drawing a contrast here, right? The rhetorician, the orator, never, always knows what to say. But before this final judge, he will be speechless. Socrates, even though he can never shut up, he always seems incongruous, right? I think we saw this in the Apology. We've seen this throughout, like people criticizing, like, Socrates, what the fuck? You walk around talking about horses and doctors and generals and shit, you know, these crazy analogies. You know, you're like an alien here. And Socrates is basically saying, as much as you seem to fit in perfectly well here, come judgment day, you'll be speechless. And I, who do not seem to fit in here at all, my soul is blameless when I get there, right? And everybody know that souls do not have acne, Sonny. That is ridiculous. I've never heard such a ridiculous thing in my life. So there you have it. We have just a few minutes to talk about why the hell he ends with this myth. What do you think of this ending? And of course, does anybody have any questions?
I feel like he's trying to end with this myth to kind of illustrate the fact that the jury doesn't truly know who he is, so they have no right to judge him. Only the gods can fairly and accurately judge him and, decide punishment. So he's basically saying that they have no true jurisdiction, so what's the point?
That's a great point, Samantha. Wow. Cameron?
I was gonna say, like, kind of going a little bit going off that, it's kind of like a reasoning for why he was like accepting of his own death, like why he knew he was going in there just to be like a jackass in front of the courts, like he knew he was gonna die, and this is kind of his explanation of that.
Yeah. Yeah. He's the opposite of an orator. He's not going to be able to flatter. He says it like, that's not what I do. We know. We get it. We know you don't flatter. You're the opposite of a flatterer. I get it. Good point. Anybody else? I mean, the larger question is, why end with a myth at all? Why choose to end with a myth? Why leave the realm of argumentation? Why leave the realm of dialogue? Okay, right? As we will continue to see, dialogue is his MO, right? That's his, so much so that we have to understand, like one of the things, to really understand, one way that an author gets his point across or her point across is through this, is that the style in which they write kind of, solidifies and conveys that point. It works to, it helps the argument. There's something there. This is a central decision of Plato, I should say, to constantly engage in dialogue. And we'll have room to discuss this in the Republic, where I think it becomes more apparent, right? He never presents Socrates as a mere monologue, although he kind of does, right? Why go through the effort of having these other voices? In some cases, they're just even rhetorical, like yes, no, yes, no. Why? Why bother? Plato is essentially saying, because dialogue is important. And suddenly, he gives dialogue, he departs from dialogue. Right? He lets Socrates become an orator for the last end of the story, but the way he decides to use his oratory is through myth. What kind of persuasion is myth? Okay, that's something we should wonder. And Sonny says, the myth does render the pursuit of truth and moral goodness more personal. If moral goodness leads to eternal happiness, if immorality leads to eternally bunking with Hades, then there's a more selfish motive to being good. Yeah. Which is not great. I think you're totally right, Sonny, by the way. And it kind of puts Socrates' argument in a lower light, right? But I'm going to put that on the back burner because that's a big question for the Republic, which will also end in myth. And there's much more discussion of myth in the Republic, so much so that we have a lot of reason to wonder why he ends with a myth in the Republic, right? Or I should put it this way, he's highly critical of myth. We'll see that criticism in Republic. Then why end with a myth, right? Okay. Any questions or comments? Well, I had another activity planned where I was going to break into groups, but I'm not going to do it because you got to go finish your papers. So I'll do that another time, okay? So I'm going to stick around and chat with anybody. You have till the end of the day to email me your stuff, okay? In a Google Doc, please. And that's about it, okay? So for next week, you're going to be reading The Republic, books 2 and part of 3. You got reading responses. Any questions? Is that all good? All right.
Do you allow resubmissions for stuff if like we're not like happy with
a rough draft? Sorry, you mean like a rewrite?
Yeah.
Talk to me.
Okay.
I'm very open-minded.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to stick around, okay? Otherwise, the rest of you have a great week. Take care of yourselves, okay?
Sherman, I just wanted to let you know that I reshared it with you, so it's all done.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good week.
You too.
I'm just gonna